edit three different images, using different ways. So I'm going to introduce different ways of editing images. What I'm going to do as I go through it, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the ethical implications of editing images and what that means. And I want you to think about it as we go through. You don't have to agree with me. And what I want you to do is when you submit at the end, you're going to submit 3 PDFs. So one PDF, optimized PDF for each of your edited images and the original JPEGs. If you use your own images, that can raise your grade to a B, and it does relate to learning outcomes. You're going to learn better if you use your own images. So I strongly suggest that you do that if you can, if you have the time and the energy to do it. Use your own images. You can start with mine if you're not able to make that step, but you're going to learn better. So I'm going to show you 3 different ways to edit an image. There's many ways in Photoshop. This is just 3 ways. And you're also going to write a couple of sentences answering the prompt question, which is it ever okay to edit images in Photoshop this way? And why? So why is it okay? So again, you don't have to agree with what I talk about. So in 3 different ways, 3 different images. And with this one and this one, you're welcome to use whatever image you can find. With this one here, you can either do the edit that I'm describing, where I'm removing all the imperfections from the image, or you can do the opposite, where you instead create this image that has an archival quality, so an old looking image where you add in scratches. So if you want to learn this kind of basic way of editing an image, that's great. If you want to do something that's more ambitious, then you can raise your grade to an A range. So let's get started. Okay, so this image on the left, the iceberg, and we're going to use the crop tool. But before we get into it, I just want you to look at one thing in this interface, and that is if you look at these tabs along the top, let's condense this here. So arrange, consolidate all tabs. If I right click on this tab, you'll see here I have this option to reveal in Finder. So that'll open up the Finder. I'm sure it works similar on Windows. You can see here that I have all my images arranged inside this images folder are all my original images. And this is particularly relevant if you think about this first image, because one day you won't be able to shoot this anymore. There will be no more icebergs. The opportunity to go back and shoot this. So this setup here where you save your original images in the images folder and then you don't save over them preserves those pixels. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to save this as a working file. So save as. So I'm not going to save it inside here. I'm going to save it inside the root of this exercise, and I'm going to call it Andrew 22.3F. This one is content aware. It's a hyphenated word, and make sure you save it as a Photoshop file. And you can see if you look at this, so let's just cut it here, that this is a background layer. Leave it like that. We're going to switch over to our crop tool. So I want you to grab this crop tool, and the first thing you'll notice is that these handles appear around the image. And if you look at the top, you'll see a couple of things that you may not have noticed before. If you've never used this tool, you'll see this straighten idea. There's delete the cropped pixels and content aware. So content aware again is Adobe's AI. So not Adobe Illustrator, artificial intelligence. So what that does is when you make a modification and there's missing pixels, the AI tries to figure out what those should be. So super powerful, very, very useful, powerful tool. And this other one, delete crop pixels, is really useful because if you think about what happens here, if I go ahead and crop this, and this is a flattened image, so I'm going to go ahead and crop this like this, and double click. You can see right away it floated the image. So it floated that layer, and because I'm not deleting the crop pixels, I can go back here to my crop tool and the pixels are still there. They don't go away. So when you crop it down in size, it will save the original images, and it has to save it with layers. I'm just going to undo to get out of here. And that is another way to work non-destructively, is to preserve the cropped pixels. So you can always go back and crop it differently later. So if you're working non-destructively, make sure that you are paying attention to that. Right now, just look at this content aware, and let's make sure that's selected. And I'm going to select this this item here called straighten. So just click on the icon. It's an icon of a level. So a level with a dotted line between it. And exit out of this zoom and grab my crop tool. What I want to do with this straighten, so I'm going to grab the level, and what you want to do with this is you want to click along the line that you want to be level with the edge of the image. So you can see here that this iceberg appears to be crooked in the water line, and that could be a couple of things. It could be that the iceberg is actually crooked. Most likely it was shot from a boat and the boat wasn't totally level, and so when the photographer shot this, the boat was a little bit crooked, the photo is crooked, and the photo looks a little bit off. So if I take this and I click and drag across here and let go, it straightens it out. And this is a form of editing that is really not unethical in any way, because we are just making the photo look like the way that we expect it to look like. We expect horizon lines to be straight. If they're not straight, make them really not straight. So if you're straightening it, that's one way. And if you are working with an image that is not, let's go back here, so let's go here. If you're working with an image that is not, that is already, where the horizon line is already straight, what you want to do for this exercise is, just for the exercise, you want to make it crooked. So let's just make it crooked enough. Just make it crooked enough so that I can see what you did. So select your straighten tool, and what you're going to do is you're going to make it a little bit less straight. So what you want to do with this is you want to click along the line where you want the line that you want level, parallel to the edge of the photo. So if your horizon line is already level, like this one isn't, but if your horizon line is already level, what you want to do is you want to exaggerate it a little bit, just so I can see that you tried using the tool and you know how to use it. So, if this is the floor line inside the house, you want to have a sky in this image, but maybe there's a sky through the window or something. Or if it's a horizon line along the beach or something, make sure that it's crooked. So you're going to let go like that, just so I can see that you took the time to learn how to use the tool. So again, I'm going to take this straighten tool. This one might be a little more obvious. There you go. So just make it so it's a little more obvious that it's crooked. In this case, so that's one option. So if you're using your own image, make sure that you exaggerate it so I can see that you learned how to use a tool. If you're using my image, or you want to correct the horizon line because it's not straight in your image, what you're going to do is you're going to click and drag. So I'm clicking and dragging, and drag right along the edge what is the horizon line, and that'll correct it. So Photoshop will rotate the image and make that line parallel with the edges of your frame. You can see that it rotated all those pixels, and that there's these transparent pixels around here. So what Content Aware is going to try and do is it's going to try and correct that. But I just want you to think a little bit about how this image was shot, because this image was probably shot in the Arctic. One day there will be no icebergs if this continues on the way it was. So the chances of shooting this image again are very low. And so again, this idea that you have to preserve the pixels is very important. And so probably what happened here is that the photographer was sitting in a boat, and the boat was not totally level when the camera was shot. And so we're not really lying when we correct this. What we're doing is we're making it look more like what people would expect it to look like. People expect horizon lines to be level. And so if they're off, the image is just going to always look a little bit off. So you can either hit enter or click on the check mark, and that'll apply the changes, and Photoshop will think for a minute, and then you'll see this kind of magical thing happens where it fills in all those missing pixels around the edge. Let's take a look here at our crop tool, and let's enlarge this a little bit, and you can see that what happened was that it did two things. One, it did crop some of the images, so it kept the same ratio and proportions and size, but it added in these pixels here that were missing, and it did a really good job. This is better than it was a year ago when I used the same image with a different class. It's quite a bit better, the job that it did on there. The other thing you can do with the crop tool, so that's the first thing you can do, is you can straighten the image or change the angle of the image, either for effect or for a correction. Is you can take here this crop tool, and I'm going to go here to this little spiderweb grid looking thing at the top and just click and hold to see what's underneath there. And you can see here we have a grid, we have rule of thirds, we have the golden ratio, and this golden spiral. And you want to make sure that you're always showing it. And what it does, as soon as we start using this tool, cropping the image, is that grid appears. And as you may know, or you should know, is the rule of thirds is this kind of, magical number, proportion, where photos just look right. The composition improves immediately if you follow the rule of thirds. So right now, this line is kind of in the center of the image. And so compositionally, it's not that strong. It's very static. It's not that interesting one way or the other. There's very little dynamic feeling to it. And being in the Arctic is not static. It's a very, I would imagine, a very dynamic place from what I know of it. Very full of life. And so you want to create this kind of sense of adventure. And so you want this juxtaposition, this imbalance between the water and the sky. And so you can create that by using the rule of thirds. And I can just drag this to the point where this line lands up right along this strongest line through the image. And then I'll just double click. And that applies it. And what Photoshop is going to try to do is, again, it's going to try and fill in these missing pixels. Again, it did a great job. It missed this part along here, but we can correct that pretty easily. If your image did not get corrected as much as this one, try it again. So try, a different, slightly different cropping, and see if it does it a little bit better. But regardless, you almost always have to do a little bit of work to correct it. One thing it's doing is the preview is making it look like there's missing pixels along the side, but they're not. Best way to look at it is at 100%. And it looks fine there. What we want to do is we just want to correct this part here. It's the best way to do it. Again, non-destructively, make a new layer. And we're going to take this tool called the clone tool. There is different ways of doing this. This is kind of one of the older ways and the most flexible ways of doing it. So this tool is very flexible. I'll show you a couple ways that it is. So as soon as I select the tool, I'm going to look here along the top, and I want to make sure that this is set to normal, that the opacity is set to 100%, flow 100%, and the angle is set to 0, and that we're doing sampling all the layers. With this layer selected here, I'm just going to call this correction. Take my crop tool. Crop tool works like a lot of other tools, transformation tools that I've shown you before, in that you have to set the point of origin. So the point where the transformation happens from. And this will be where Photoshop is sampling from. So if I click, wherever I click, so I'm holding my Option key down and I click here. And that means it's going to sample from this part of the sky and paint up here. And I have this layer selected, so it's going to paint on that layer. And I can just go ahead and paint across here. You can see one thing that happens is because I'm using a relatively small brush, that I can see where I have painted. So I don't want that. I want it to blend in pretty quickly with the background. So the best way to do that is actually just work with a larger, softer brush. So again, you can do that up here, but the best place to change your brush sizes is actually close to where you're editing. So I'm going to right click, and that brings up the palette there. This here, so the cursor is showing me the size of the palette. If I go here to my preferences and I go to cursors, this is where you set that. So if you can't see the full size brush tip, you go to your preferences, cursors, and show full size brush tip, and that'll make it so you can see the size of the brush tip there. So I'm going to right click again, and I'm going to enlarge it. If it's not exactly the size that I wanted, if I think I can go a little bit larger, I can just go up and down with the arrow key, and that'll actually change the value in that size field. If I hold the shift key down while I do that, it'll jump in larger increments, so it'll be faster. So again, I'm going to hold the click, I'm going to click and then drag. And then I can do this pretty quickly. And it's sampled right to the edge here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that again from somewhere else. So again, I work non-destructively. This information is on another layer. I can easily turn it on and off. So I haven't changed any of the pixels underneath. This here is all new. And you can see that a lot of this is kind of mogul-y. So this, what I did is okay. I might want to go back and paint some dark. It becomes very painterly at this point. You actually can go in, try even a larger brush size and try, and again, I'm sampling from all layers. So that means it'll sample this layer and this layer at this point. So I'm going to click, and I'm just going to go and soften that edge a little bit just to make it look like a little more realistic. But one thing you can see at the top here, so if I deselect this, you can see along the top here that it looks a little bit mogul-y. So it looks like, that a lot of people have been going down the slope and creating these little lumps, and it doesn't look very natural. So what I'm going to do to correct that is I'm just going to I'm going to paint on the same layer, but I'm going to sample from a different part of the image, and I'm just going to paint in here some of these clouds. So I'm going to sample from here, and I'm going to paint in here some more clouds. It becomes a little bit like the Happy Painter, where you can just go in and paint things in there. What you want to do is you just never want to look like you're repeating what you did. So keep sampling from different parts and painting in until you end up with something that feels somewhat natural. And all you're doing is painting in clouds, right? So I think that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to do that thing that we've done before. So I'm going to take these two things and I'm going to convert it to a smart object. And then the last thing I want you to do with this image is I want you to go and replace the sky. So I'm going to go here to edit and go to sky replacement. And if you think about this image and what is involved in it, is we are looking at a very dynamic image, and this is a little bit vanilla. So getting up here to the North Pole, it's probably not a North Pole, it's probably like near Halifax or something, but getting out there on a boat and shooting the shot, super critical. You can't always control what the weather's going to look like. And so what I want to do is I want to add a more dynamic looking sky. So this is one I've used before, is the Northern Lights. But it could be any of these. It's going to give me a more dynamic feeling sky. So Photoshop does a few things. I'm going to show you after we apply it what it looks like. But just choose a sky that you find interesting, something with a little more dynamic. Whatever image you're using, you're going to replace the sky. Just make it sure it looks natural. So the worst thing you can do is to put this in and it looks fake, right? You want it to look pretty natural. So people would expect to see the Northern Lights up here. This is okay. It looks like it's dusk, and those are the Northern Lights. So I'm going to click OK, and that, it does this amazing thing where we don't have to do all this close cropping. It just goes and replaces the sky for us, and it can do it. If you look online, you can see some very complex transformations that Photoshop has done, like inside a bridge. It's gone in and filled in all the holes. Just it's worth looking here to see what Photoshop did. So what Photoshop did is it actually created some masks. So let's take a quick look at some of these masks. I'm just going to hold the Option key down and click so we can see it. It actually puts some of that sky so it blends through onto the iceberg. And that's important if you think about what happens with an object inside of a space, is it takes on the color of that space. So it's going to take on some of the color of the sky. So if I turn this off, you can see that's the original image. It added this whole new folder structure over top of it. With this next one, again, you can do this, or you can actually go and take one of those, take an image that you have, so a modern day image like that you just shot, preferably one of the shots from your hidden careers, and add aging to it. So make it archival. Add scratches. There's lots of tutorials online to do that. So go ahead and try that, and that'll raise your grade. But with this one, this is a bonbon that I created with one of the companies I work with. This was an edible. So very complex product to make, lots of science behind it, lots of production. When we got to the point where we were ready to start marketing it, we picked our best pieces. I grabbed them and put them into a box, put them in really carefully, very carefully cushioned, took them to the photographer. He created this, set up this whole scene with a like a reflection to bring in the light in here. When we looked at the enlarged images, all these scratches had appeared in the product. So this isn't something, I knew they were there, but it can happen where you can go shoot something and you don't see the scratches until you get there. That when it's enlarged, you're going to see it. And we were using it at an enlarged. So I knew this editing would have to happen when I brought it back to the studio. So again, make sure you're preserving the original pixels. So we're going to go here and go File, Save As, and save this into the root of this, and we're going to call it your name 22.3F, and we're going to call it cloning, and we're going to save it as a Photoshop file. Go ahead and save. So I'm going to call this cloning. So I'm going to go ahead and take my clone tool, and you can see right now that it's cloning from the previous file. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reset my starting point, and I'm going to actually change the size of my brush, and I'm just going to click somewhere where there isn't as many scratches. So there's quite a few different types of scratches on here, but the most visible ones are these heavier ones on the surface, and it has to do with the reflection in the image. So what I want you to do is do that. Just go in and remove, set a time limit. You don't have to make this perfect. I just want to be able to see that you took the time to learn the tool. So set a timer for 15 minutes, do this for 15 minutes, save it, and submit it, and you're done. So long as I can see that you made some corrections. So clean up this surface here if you want, or clean up this surface. Is going to be harder to do, so maybe focus on this one. It's a little bit easier. And do some of this one. And then I also want you to see that you corrected some of this edge. So this is one place where the cloning tool is very powerful. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click here, and again, make sure that you're sampling from all layers and that you're working on this cloning layer, not on the original layer. So you can see here when I sample right here, and when I drag this out, you can see that I'm getting a preview of where that clone is going to land. And so that helps me align it with the image. So that allows me to recreate this edge that's been so badly damaged. So it's it's pretty amazing tool. It's been around a long time, and it's a lot of the newer tools in Photoshop really just mimic this one. So I'm going to go ahead, remove this. So again, I don't think of this as unethical editing. We're really just taking the product back to the point where we're kind of matching the image of the creator. So in this case, it's the chef. So the person who created this had a particular vision of what this product would look like. And sometimes you'll see it when they shoot ads for McDonald's. They'll do the same thing. They almost always work with real food now. They used to actually work with like toothpaste and stuff that wouldn't melt under the lights. But now they almost always work in product shots. They work with real food. We were working with real food. It just wasn't the same as what the chef had originally envisioned. And so cocoa butter, so this is done. This is 2 layers of cocoa butter on the inside of the mold. When you pour the chocolate inside, it adheres to the cocoa butter. When you demold it, it comes out with this beautiful shiny surface. And that's where we're taking it back to the moment that it came out of the mold. And I'm going to correct this little bit here too. I'm not going to spend a lot of time correcting this edge along here. We just want to get the sense that we have this beautiful reflection here. So I could actually take a similar color from somewhere else in the image and try and fix some of this edge here as well. Spend your 15 minutes just trying different parts of the image to correct it. So I want you to correct some of the edges. That's a very And you know what? This is a really important skill. There's product photographers, good product photographers, really hard to find in the city. There's a few of them. Most people want to shoot people. So you find a lot of people that do great shots of people. Not a lot of great concept photographers. Some photographers that can take like an advertising concept and turn it around. Not a lot of really good product photographers. They tend to be a little bit, I've had some friends that kind of did it as a favor, and they were kind of like, yeah, I don't really want to do this. I shoot people. But you know what? There's good money in product photography, and it's really hard to shoot images of little things and make them look beautiful when they're enlarged. So a lot of, one thing that happens to these products is they have a static charge to them, and when you take them out of the kitchen, they just attract everything to it. So I want you to look at correcting the dust, some of this reflection, and removing some of the imperfections. So when this gets demolded out of the mold, there's some places where you get bubbles. And this is actually the fault of the kitchen, but it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be little bubbles. And when you enlarge it, that's actually something, if this product gets judged, and it was, so one of these products actually won a very significant award. When these products get judged, they get judged for no bubbles. It's actually one thing that they look at. It's very hard to produce a lot of product without bubbles. So, with no bubbles along the surface, right? So you have to really vibrate that mold a lot when it has a chocolate inside of it to get the bubbles out. So here's another one, like another piece of chocolate that's stuck to it. And if we had looked at it if we looked at it more carefully and we decided to do some of these corrections before, great. But it's actually easier to do that in the post shot, right? We were doing a lot of correction to it. So yeah, I want to see that you removed some of the bubbles, some of the dust, and some of the reflection. Spend about 15 minutes. And if you do a little bit too much, remember that you are actually shooting on a different layer. So you can actually take the eraser tool, make sure it's nice and small, and you can actually erase this with the eraser tool. You can take the eraser tool here, which is E. I don't know why I didn't grab it. Okay. Right click with the eraser tool, go nice and small, and you can actually erase it. That's one of the advantages of working with, editing onto layers. So spend your time on this, go ahead and save it, and when you're done, you're going to save it as a PDF. You'll notice here with my previous one, it's still not saved. There's an asterisk beside it. So I'm going to go back here and save this one as well. So with this last one, it's the more controversial way of editing that I'm going to show you today. And it is actually modifying the features of the face. But it has a use that's, I think, is perfectly ethical. But you guys decide for yourselves and let me know. But the first thing I want to do is I want to actually right click on this and convert it to a smart object. So that'll allow me to edit non-destructively, and I'm going to save it. So file, save as, and I'm going to save it into here. So I'm going to call this Andrew 22.3. I'm going to call it exercise 8 and Liquify. Liquify GD 101. So again, who, when, what, and where. Trying to do 157. 7. Oh, I did 101 for the other ones too. Okay. All right. I'll have to fix that. Okay. So here what we're doing is we are looking at changing the features of this face. So we're going to use this tool called, this filter called Liquify. And what it does is as soon as you launch it, you'll see that you have this opportunity to modify the face. So you can modify it either by dragging. So just scroll over the image and you can see that you can change the size of different elements or the angle of them. So you can change the size of the lips. Some things work the same as what you would expect in other places. And so like if you click on any of these items, you can actually change the size of them. And so there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. One is, yes, you are modifying this face. So you're making, alterations to the face. You can get into issues with it. But another way to look at it is when you look at anything through a lens, the lens distorts the image. That is not the way we actually see it. And so what you can use this tool for is you can return the face back to closer to the way that you know that it is, right? So if you know this character, you can actually look at it and say, okay, you know what, this lens distorted it. I'm going to make some corrections here that make it look more accurate. But obviously it can be used either way. But with it, in this case, you can see here that when I make these changes here to the image here, so if I change the size of an element here, you can see that it changes the value here on the side. So that is a way to see what is happening, right? So upper lip, if you want to change the size of the upper lip, 0%, and 0%, you can bring it back to what it was originally. So the upper lip, 100, so that's moving it up or down. So it can't move it up that much, but so that brings it down so it's nice and really tight. I said nice for some reason. I don't know why I said nice. Anyways, you can actually, what I want you to do here is exaggerate it. So I want you to just play with the tool and exaggerate everything. So whatever you do, I want it to be really clear what you edited. I have the original image, so you don't have to submit this one. But if you're going to use your own image, make sure you submit the original so I can compare the two together. Just want to see that you took the time to learn how to use these features on here. You can do whatever you want, have fun with it, just as long as you exaggerate it. And you're going to click OK. And you can see here that it attached the smart filter to it. So you can turn it off and turn it on, and you get the same. In one file, you have both. So this is where I'm going to take a minute to reinforce this idea that you have to submit, if you submit original images, you have to submit it with the credit information on the image. If you did it before, it's going to be easy. If you got to do it now, it's going to take a little bit more work because you got to actually put it in there, save it, and then remove it. But this is one way you can do it. So if you forgot to do it, you can turn off this filter and go back to your original image here. So I'm going to take this one here, Austin Wade. It's got the URL in there as well. I'm going to copy it. So I just hit return to go to edit the name. Command C to copy. And then I'm going to go back here to my Photoshop. And I'm going to take my text tool and click in here. And I'm going to paste the name of the image. So that is sitting on top of everything. So I'm going to go and I'm using IBM Plex Sans. Great. I'm just going to make it so I can see it. So I might need to be a little bit larger. 72 point. Make sure that I can read it when I look at it. So, so this is going to be at 100%. So if I look at here at 100%, 100%. You're going to do that with every image that's not one of the ones used in this exercise. So Command T to get the free transform, and then I can just rotate it around, put it on its side. And I'm going to do it as black. Untitled. Some of you guys have told me this. There's no title with the image. If there's no title with it, just call it untitled. Unsplash does this weird thing where the title is visible from the Google search, but it's a little bit harder to find on the image itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And here's where I can do export as okay, and you can actually make this smaller, so we can make it 50%. It's okay for the original. Click on export, and you're going to save it. Use the same file name, just save it as a JPEG in here. And then with this one, so in order to save the one that's the PDF, you're going to go File, Save as a Copy. So all you're going to do is turn off your credit, and you're going to turn on the filter and do Save as a Copy, PDF, and use your shortcut that you saved here. So optimized image. And you can see here that compresses the image. Go ahead and save. And that's the image that you're going to submit. So see you on the next one.